Hi everyone, welcome. I'm here at my desk. I'm preparing to head down to the wormery to tend to my African night crawlers again. It was only 3 days ago that I was down there, and at that time I actually used this board right here to outline what I was doing, and I noticed that I had not yet wiped what was written on here. So the information on here, with the exception of the passage of 3 days, is all still true. I've still got 2 African nightcrawler systems. The number of feedings are still consistent. And the information that I've got down here in the lower right corner indicating what sort of efforts have been taken so far to try to control my mite situation in these systems is still valid too. I've tried drying the bins. I've tried starving the bins. And I've even tried adjusting the pH. Try to reduce the acidity in the bins. So the last time I was in these bins 3 days ago, my main objective was to just provide the bins with a little bit more drying opportunity, and to that end I just stirred the material in the bins around to help it aerate better and evaporate more readily. But since then I received some feedback which gave me an idea that we might be able to apply a 4th attempt at this point to see what we can do to try to reduce or eliminate the mites in those systems. So at this point, what we're dealing with is it's a 158-day-old and 133-day-old system, where the last time we fed, it was 2 weeks ago. And it was a week ago that we attempted to revisit these bins to restore these attempts at drying, adjusting the pH, and starving the bins. And today we're adding a 4th countermeasure. I'm curious to see if it's going to work, but the feedback that I received was that the viewer in his comment told me that he had at one point ended up putting a piece of paper towel into one of his worm bins, a piece of paper towel on which he had rested some cooked bacon to absorb some of the excess grease from the bacon after cooking it, so that after he ate the bacon, had some greasy paper, the paper ended up in his worm bins as bedding. And to his surprise, within a day or so, the paper was covered in mites. And he was almost willing to guess that nearly all of the mites in his bin had actually congregated on that piece of paper to go after the grease. So as luck would have it, I've got some bacon grease that we could try to apply another 4th countermeasure, which is, at this point, I'm just going to consider it as baiting. And I just figured really quick before we head down there, I've already got this board here that had most of the information about these systems sitting here ready to go. So I thought we'd just review what my game plan was before going down there. All I need to do is take a quick detour to the kitchen. I'm going to soak these pieces of paper. It's going to be torn in half. I'm going to tear this in half, soak it in bacon grease, and drop it in the bins to see if maybe we can lure the mites out of the material. And I guess to go hand in hand with that whole concept of trying to lure the mites out of the system, I'm also going to put a stop to the drying. And effectively what that really just means is that I'm going to restore the plastic coverings to the bins so that whatever moisture is in those bins will, once again, while it's trying to evaporate, it'll be captured by that plastic, restoring the dampness to the top surface of the bin so that that too promotes the movement of the mites up to the surface, where there's going to be a little bit more moisture collecting at this point. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed to see if this works. So let's head on down there now and get to work on this. Okay, so before getting started, I just wanted to come down and sort of set the stage and make sure I have everything I need at my fingertips. So before I put my glove on, I just wanted to put a few things out here. So we'll begin with me putting my glove on and going into the bins and tilling them up like I did a couple days ago, since, hey, if I'm in there already, why not? I do think that the ongoing drying of the material and the ability for it to air out will continue to help with the with the depopulation of the mites in the material. But right here, I've got a little demonstration of what's in the bins right now. In the bins, there's a piece of paper covering up, a couple pieces of paper. I believe in most cases there is a piece of coffee filter in there as well. So, those will come out. I'll remove them so I can do the tilling up. And then before we put everything back on, the covers back on, I'll take these pieces of paper. I've torn the piece of paper in half now. And right now I've got my collection of bacon fat, bacon grease. It was in the refrigerator. It's upstairs right now. It's sitting on the coffee warmer. So I took the coffee pot off and I put that jar of frozen bacon grease on there to let it melt so that it's fluid. Gonna soak the paper, place that right onto the bed of the material in the bin. And then as I start restoring things, I'll put this, I'll put the coffee filter over the top as well as the newspaper coverings. And right over the middle of it, I've got my squirt bottle here. I'm going to dampen some of the materials that are just over the bait. Because while I think the moisture itself might serve as bait, because the mites like the moisture, I'm really just treating the bacon grease that's going to be soaked into these little bits of paper towel as my bait. And I didn't want to wait for the evaporation of the moisture out of the material in the bins to soak the material out here. I really wanted to sort of get that moisture situation jump started. So I'm going to, dampen these pieces of paper that are going to be just resting right on top. I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm going to dampen the newspaper itself. We'll see when we get there. And then I've got a couple sheets of plastic here that we're going to be using to cover up with at the end. And that's going to create that vapor barrier to help keep the moisture from just evaporating. It's going to keep the dampness in this area so that it does sort of promote the movement of the mites up to come for the bait. So let's get started. Well, as you can see, it's not a lot, but it'll be plenty for what we need. This is my little collection of warmed up fluid at this point, bacon grease. If it were at room temperature, I don't think it would flow. It's usually in the refrigerator, so I took it out of the refrigerator. It's still even warm, I can feel it. I just brought it down from my coffee maker. I placed it onto the heating pad to melt the frozen grease, and this is what we're going to be using. So let's get the first of the bins out here on the bench to get started. We'll begin with the older of the two systems. This is the VermiBag Tote, and as I mentioned earlier, here's that coffee filter. I guess this will be just below. Let's see, we're going to put the bait right on top of the surface of the material, the piece of paper towel, and then I'll cover up with this, and then we'll cover up with the newspaper. But before we get started with the baiting activity, I think we'll go ahead and we'll give this system just one more quick till. Although in the case of this bin, I don't think the material in here is quite so damp as it is in the other system. Even down here at the very bottom where you would expect to find the most damp material, I've got quite crumbly and loose, dry stuff. So I think the drying in here has come a long way. Although I don't think that this system needed it quite as much as the other system. Either way, I just figured if I'm going to be troubleshooting the mite situation in my two African nightcrawler systems, I'm going to try to apply consistent troubleshooting steps. So I've got this thing about having, sort of the opportunity to compare results in similar systems to one another. So I try to oftentimes team up systems that are similar to each other, either similar in age or similar from the perspective of having the same type of worms in them. So in this case, since these are my two African nightcrawler systems, they naturally get teamed up with one another because of the fact that they're both the same type of worm. And I think it was in this system that we had already observed that the food was getting depleted pretty nicely. I think there was a great deal of leftovers remaining in the other system that we're going to work on. But for some reason I thought that we were starting to run a little bit low on food. And even though we haven't tilled the middle of the bin yet, I thought I felt stuff down here in the middle. I know we had some leftovers, so I know we had this banana peel, which is where I think we saw the majority of the mites hanging out. The other idea I had was that if I can isolate one or two of the materials in the bin that seems to be drawing the greatest number of mites anyway, that we would place those right near the top surface so that they could catch a whiff of the delicious bacon grease and come right up for it. So if I see stuff that appears to have a lot of little white specks on it, I'm going to assume that those are all mites. And I'm going to do my best to try to leave that stuff pretty close to the surface. And in most cases, it's just these leftover scraps of food. I think these are bedding actually over here, but they've also got a good number of little white specks on them. So I'm going to position all these items that I believe are occupied by mites near the surface so as to make it really easy for them to gain access to the bacon grease. And yeah, I gotta tell you, it smells so good down here now from that bacon grease being here right next to me. Making me hungry. Alright, so we've got a fairly level space over here in the bin. We've tilled up everything, and you know, at this point from a drying perspective, I don't even know if I would want to go much drier in here because the material is all very nice and loose and flaky. Perfectly suitable for sifting if that were to be the next step. It would pass right through a sifter for easy screening, which is kind of nice. So my hope is that I'm not going to, at some point, see this material go the other way, let it swing to be really damp again. Or I don't even remember if this material was ever really damp. I think this material was always pretty much where we wanted it to be, as far as, you know, kind of looseness and flakiness. So I've got a pretty nice and level space here at this point. And it's here where we're going to apply our bait. So I'm definitely curious to see what happens. You know, I guess I'm also curious, the reason I'm putting these pretty heavily infested items back in, some people might be saying, well, why don't you just take that piece and just remove it now? And, you know, I figured let's use this as an opportunity to see if this really is what attracts the mites. Is it strong enough of a, attractant, if that's the right word, to actually move them away from something that they're already clearly enjoying. So I'm just, you know, I'm leaving it because I'm just curious of what the answer to that question is. So now I don't think we're going to need a whole lot. I'm even wondering if I should maybe double this thing up, but nah, you know what? I'm going to leave it a single layer, just the way it is. And I'm going to carefully try not to overrun the situation here. I'd like for this piece of paper to be fairly well soaked with the bacon grease. So I think we're pretty much there. I don't know if there's really, you know, the need for any more than that. That was maybe, you know, 4 or 5 drops tops. But we've pretty much soaked the paper at this point. Looks like we've even dripped a little bit down onto the material below. So this is our bait. This is what we're hoping is going to draw the mites out of the bin. So So here I'm going to cover up and I'm going to start applying a little bit of moisture to this piece of paper, because there again I'd really like for the mites to come up, and I'm pretty sure that the moisture is one of the things that they're going to be drawn to as well. My hope is that they don't end up coming to this piece of paper instead. I've got a feeling if there's a choice between the two, though, I think that they're probably going to be drawn to the bacon grease, or at least that's what I'm hoping. I'm not going to bother covering this with moisture, although maybe right in the middle, so that the dry piece of paper doesn't end up becoming sort of a sponge and removing the moisture from the piece that we want to use as the draw. And at this point, we're back to covering up the system with plastic again. And in this case, it probably makes good sense because the system is already kind of at a point where we probably wouldn't want the material to dry out a whole lot more, right? So let's do the same to the next system. Alright, so this is the younger of the two systems. Here I believe we had a little bit more dampness going on than in the VermiBag Tote. And you wouldn't be able to tell from looking at the materials out here on the top surface. But as you can see, we've got a kind of a similar situation. Pieces of newspaper, a coffee filter, and then a bin with some pretty dry looking material out on the surface. I believe that once we get down into tilling the material around, though, that's when we're going to start to notice that there's a little bit more moisture in this material than we saw in the VermiBag Tote. Although the drying is, I don't know, seems to be working pretty good here. The material doesn't seem quite as damp as it had seemed previously, and yeah. And I was just really getting concerned at this point. I didn't want to get things too dry. And I think that the moisture level that we saw in the previous system is about as dry as I would want to go. Here I'm still seeing a good amount of moisture. And I'm definitely seeing, you know, food particles that still seem to have a good number of mites all over them. It does seem to be, I don't know, food scraps here and there too. I think this bin also had a lot more leftovers remaining in it. So the whole starving aspect just wasn't going to be quite as effective in here because of the amount of remaining food in here. And even though we were kind of feeding down the middle, it does seem like right over here I was seeing banana peels, I was seeing avocado shells, other various bits and pieces of food. So there does seem to be a good amount of leftovers in here, even though this bin hasn't been fed in a couple of weeks. I just think that this bin might not have quite as many worms in it as the VermiBag Tote. Alright. I was kind of saving the middle for last because I believe that that's where the majority of the leftovers are still going to be remaining. So let's get down into tilling up the middle section a bit too. Let's see what we have as far as leftover foods. And potentially some food bits that have high concentrations of mites hanging out on them. If I find any such items, then I'll set them aside so we can position them kind of close to the surface and, you know, get the mites that are on those objects near where we want them to be, which is on our grease-soaked paper towel. And, you know, I'm finding food scraps, but these are kind of hard chunks of vegetable. Not surprising that the worms haven't really made much progress on them. But other than that, I'm not really seeing a whole lot else. I'm not seeing any particular items that seem to have a large number of mites hanging out on them. I just get this impression that there's just mites everywhere in this one. Yeah, some of these tougher objects seem to be taking a little bit longer. So, you know, some of these things might be the stem of a banana. I'm pretty sure that this right here is the stem of a banana. This thing's got to be a couple months old at this point based on the breakdown that we can observe on it. The avocado seed is also a spot where you would normally see a good number of mites hanging out. So like here, I believe all these little white specks, these are probably mites. So we'll position that near the surface. But I can't say that I'm seeing a whole lot of anything else that appears to be a big draw for the mites that we can relocate to the top surface. There just seems to be a good large number of mites just generally all over the place. So whatever, that was just another little additional idea I had while I was doing this. But it's not so important that we do this whole repositioning of food bits, especially if we don't have any in here that seem to fit the bill. So all the other food bits we're just going to return back down low. Maybe this piece here that seemed to have a good number of mites hanging out on it, we'll position that near the surface. Yeah, it's a shame. I really want to do restore plastic coverings to these systems too, because the moisture does seem to really promote a lot more worm activity. And when there's no plastic coverings, things on the surface get pretty arid. And I would think that, you know, besides the top surface, that upper, you know, inch or so is probably not really a popular spot for the worms either, when they could sense the dryness over there. They're probably just going to stick to work in the lower sections of the bin, and I'd really rather just have them feel pretty comfortable anywhere and everywhere within the bin, working all the material around the bin down. So I don't know, that one piece that we saw a good number of mites on, I'm just going to position that right there on the center. In comes our bait. Same deal here, we're just going to apply those 5 or 6 drops. Well, these are definitely more than just drops. But it doesn't take much, it seems, to soak up this piece of paper towel. The grease is still kind of flowing here. And I bet if we just leave it, it'll probably make its way around the entire piece of paper at this point. It doesn't need to be completely soaked, but I figured, what the heck, let's get it as soaked as we can, if possible. So let's see what happens. Not much left here, right? Other than, what else? Yeah, putting the coverings back on and applying a little bit of moisture to try to sweeten the deal. So, I don't know, if you're like me, a lot of times you feel a little bit disenfranchised because you come to the video to really see the results of what's being tried. But the format of my videos on my channel seems to be more of kind of like a journal. So I just don't really hold on to days and days worth of video footage and then compile it to tell the entire story. I'm kind of more about the day-by-day activities, and you know, there'll certainly be a resolution to this story, and probably in the next few days for that matter, because I was led to believe that this this bacon fat will draw the worms in really quickly, possibly within a day or so. So, you know, it could be that within another day or two we'll be back in here to see how things are progressing. You know, in fact, you know, I can almost guarantee that at some point tomorrow I probably will come down here to see what's happening with this. At which point I'll probably shoot some video and keep the story going. So hopefully, you know, people that came here to find out how this story ends aren't too disappointed. But if you hang on to your hats, we'll be at the finish line soon with this, and hopefully we're met with success, because I'd really love to see the mites in these systems gone. All right, everyone, that's it for today. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I hope this works. And thank you to the viewer who suggested this idea. Thanks in advance, assuming that it's going to work. I hope it does, but we'll see. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to my channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Bye now.